It's hard to get advice from people who don't understand what you got going on and don't understand the lifestyle. If you don't show up today, you're not gonna eat. They're not in the thick of it with you or haven't at least been through the thick of entrepreneurship. It's hard for people to really talk about how to get you from point A to point B if they never took the journey themselves. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself one teeny tiny little favor and make sure to give us a follow, because I don't want you to miss out on any of the amazing guests we have coming on. Without further ado, I have amazing guests. I was able to go to FinCon in October in New Orleans, and I got to meet a ton of amazing people. Honestly, in terms of like the people that I've met, hands down the best conference bar none. Like it wasn't even close to the amount of amazing people. And I got to meet this one lady named Shani that I'm super excited to bring to you guys today. And Shani, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity yet, the pleasure to get to know you, to get to meet you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
I assist my clients with what I would call money therapy, in terms of always being able to connect your emotions back to your money habits, things that you haven't accomplished yet, things that you have already accomplished, and what does that um, teach you about your emotional health and where you are at this time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so now, Shani, before we get into all the amazing good stuff you got going on, take us back in the time machine a little bit. What was little Shani like growing up?
Oh, little Shani grew up very economically pampered. I had a really, really good childhood, as relates to the access that I had to financial resources, the access that I had to education, the access that I had to a balanced emotional environment to be raised in was really, really good. So that was like little girl Shawnee world. And then I transitioned into what would be my princess era, that I would call, like, when I was in I actually be my princess dethroning. So once I got to college, I
Yeah.
realized that, oh my gosh, money really doesn't grow on trees. It does, but
Yeah.
not that kind. So most of the my I've been working myself backwards to get myself back to the amount of financial and emotional stability I felt as a child, just because I feel that just largely American families really don't know how to transition their children from being children into being adulthood. I don't think
Yeah.
that it's specifically my parents. I just think that it's a larger challenge about being able to get your children to move through the sequence of, adolescence, being a teenager, being a young adult, getting into full on adulthood. I don't think that we always do a good job of that, and because of it, I would call that particular time period as being like the financial dethroning
Yeah.
of what I would consider to be my princess era while when I entered college.
College. Let me ask you, so to take it back a little bit, before college, at any point in time, like middle school, elementary, or high school, like were you ever interested in money at all? Was money or something that you liked talking about, or did you take like an entrepreneurship class in like high school or something like that?
Mm,
Like when did that ever come to
well,
play?
I got my first job when I was 14. I was a candy striper. And then
Okay.
I also worked for the movie theaters. I would be the person who used to pack the nachos. So at that time, I had the opportunity to kind of experience what it was like to control my own money. But
Yeah.
the money really didn't have an assignment. It was just extra. I didn't really have to do anything with the money.
Yeah.
So there wasn't anything like that. In high school, I spent my time working for the newspaper, being a part of the radio station, being a part of TV. Those were the experiences that I had, but not so much in what it is that you would be describing. Oh, wait a minute. So I did have one bout of
Okay.
entrepreneurship. Now that I think about it, I would always be the person selling the most Krispy Kreme donuts. I one time we would have different type of competitions for selling different things. I would be the person that would win the competition because I
Yeah.
was not afraid to sell that chocolate candy or to go knocking on doors, any of those things like that. So yeah, that experience is not foreign to me in terms of delving into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's like pretty much like door-to-door sales 101 right there. Going
Oh
around
man,
selling
that was
Krispy
like the
Kreme donuts.
ultimate crash course, but it wasn't so hard. I guess because I was a child, most children would do that. And then the other part of entrepreneurship, so now that you're getting me to jog my memory, I wasn't really thinking about it. I also grew up in a hair salon, and one of my biggest entrepreneurial influences would be my grandmother. My grandmother
Okay.
was a cosmetologist, and that's really where I learned entrepreneurship one on one. She was able to she had her own business, and then she used that business to she had like what's called I come from the banking world, so she had what's called sticky products, right? So in
Hmm.
the bank, if you're a banker, like when you come to the bank, they don't just want you to get a checking account. They want you to get your debit card there, they want you to get your mortgage there, they want you to have your savings account there, they want you to have your online banking there, they want you to get your car loans there, because the more that you have there, the more likely that you're not going to abandon the bank and get your new one, right? They call those sticky
Hmm.
products. So my grandmother, aside from her having a cosmetologist business, she also used to sell cake. And then she would sell like sodas. And then she would also sell stuff for the women to be able to take care of their hair when they went home, you know? So she had all of these different ways of being able to connect with her clients on multiple levels. She
Yeah.
also was the kind of person that would really like emotionally get to know her clients. So I guess that's why I don't just, deal with the money aspects of people. I deal with
Yeah.
the relational aspect of people. That would be something that I learned with my grandmother, in terms of knowing that whatever service that the person is coming to you for is not actually just that service. It's just two layers where it's also a bonding experience that they're connecting with you for. So they know, trust, and like you by some degree. And then
Yeah.
they're also coming to you for that service per se. So now that you're jogging my memory, I'm thinking of all the entrepreneurial experiences that I had coming into the breaking and the dethroning of what would be considered my princess self.
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned that. I feel like for whatever reason, and I'm not sure like how this came together or why this came together, but like hair salons and barbershops are like the ultimate, like environment just to talk about life and connect with people for whatever reason. I don't know. Like, I go in my barbershop and like I mean, I've been going to my barber now for almost 5 years. It's been going a little while. And
Mhm,
as every time you catch up and there's like once he brings the razor out, I stop talking like that. That's like, hey, all right, you focus up, do your job. But
yeah.
like when he just like give me like my little taper on the side, uh we just chop it up about life, and it's one of those situations where it's like you really get to connect with the people that you're working with and get to it's like my barber knows more about my life than I'd say some of my friends sometimes, because I go barbershop maybe like once a month, and some friends, especially like the low maintenance friends that you're still cool and locked in, but you haven't seen in a while. It's like barber knows more about me than they do and what I got going on. So, but to fast forward the story a little bit, you said you got dethroned in college. That's when you realized money didn't grow on trees. Well, it did, but not in the way that you thought it did when you were younger, right?
No,
So,
for
what was
sure
that
not.
culture shock like? Because I was talking to another guy I met at FinCon, and we're talking about how college, like being that broke college student, that you got to find ways to be scrappy and make ends meet. So, what was that kind of culture shock like? And I never heard the term economically pampered. It
Oh yeah,
sounds sounds very
economically pampered.
fancy.
Economically pampered. Code for just spoiled, rotten. I was also the only child for 10 years, so I didn't get a sibling until I was 10. So I didn't have to share anything. I didn't have to share any toys. I didn't share anything. So I kind of really had like a very exclusive, independent space to grow up in, on top of being surrounded by lots of adults who were, mid-age. So they had a lot of spare change to support my projects and my ideas and to give me conversation. It was just like this lap of luxury, both economically and emotionally.
Yeah.
So when I got to college, it was a lot different in terms of it became apparent that the resources that my parents had access to, well, specifically my grandmother, because she was the one who was mostly doting on me the most, largely was in credit, wasn't necessarily in dollars, so it wasn't really cash. Um, so obviously when I got to college, she wasn't that freedom that I once had in terms of having access to her credit card. So it felt like this endless amount of money. When I got to college, that was no longer available to me. She was a lot more restrictive on my access to the cards, obviously, because I was no longer living in the home. So she needed to be able to have a little bit more control. So that my ability to go into the store and just not think about what something costs was no longer available to me. I could go in, rack up a $500 tab and not even think about it, and that's when I was like 12, 13. That's like how I spent my teen years. I just never thought about it. I buy a
Hmm.
pair of $200, $300 jeans, never thought about it. When I got to college, I literally had to think about every single thing because I didn't have access to this endless amount of money anymore. A lot of my the individuals that I went to college with, some of their parents did have access to different levels of resources. So I didn't have a car my first year of college, but a lot of my roommates and people that I was connecting with online, they already had a car. They have like BMWs, they would have, so I was like, oh, wow, yeah, these are real princesses. I don't know what that was I had before. So then the law of comparison starts to come into play, and that begins to play a role. The next year I was able to get a car though. The very next year, my parents was able to go ahead and give me a car. I had to help out with the payments, but that was fine. I still had a car. The way how, so I still went through a bit of bitterness and just like, just it's like a baby having a pacifier ripped out of their hand without anybody actually, telling you about this, rite of passage that you're undergoing. I just felt like so alone, and my independence was very overwhelming. Like I liked the independence and the freedom of being able to come in whenever I wanted, not to have to have any accountability, but I didn't necessarily particularly care for the lack of financial resources that I had access to. So at that time, I developed like another syndrome that I'm often not proud of, but sometimes it does serve me. Being a penny pincher, during that period of time, I no longer had the luxury of just being mindless about picking up things in the store. So I became very cheap, right? When I looked at things, now I have to look at the price, I have to look at the cost. I never had to do that before. So I went through that process, and then I because I felt so alone, and so overwhelmed by being responsible, I then I started working endlessly. So I was a RA on college, so I never had to worry about staying on campus. Where would I go? I worked at the
Hmm.
bookstore, so I would get this big discount when it came to my books. I was a part of student government, and my student government job actually paid, so I didn't really have to go off campus a whole lot because I would go to the different departments on the campus and just become employed through all of those different departments. On top of being an RA, you get free housing, but not only getting free housing, I also got like a financial staff stipend for actually being there. So At that time, when I went from the penny pincher, I became someone who like kind of like overworked and used work as a way to kind of like avoid my family because I just didn't like that transition. Now, as an adult, I realized that they had their own responsibilities, they had their own life. They really wasn't thinking about my rite of passage and how to transition me from being a spoiled brat into being, you know, a young adult. Like they weren't really thinking about it. It's not something they did intentional. It's just that largely Americans are just not intentional about that process, you know, in terms of
Yeah.
just weaning their children off from one financial resource to another. So I would use work to kind of avoid that. I never would want to come home. I just felt overwhelmed by my independence. So yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I mean, for better or for worse, I mean, at least it was like a productive and at least in some case hobby that you picked up, right? Working, it's like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
overwhelmed with my and responsibilities. I might as well just work and make some money to, I mean,
Yeah.
to
Right.
escape.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like the
Where
core
is it?
root of it, but like at least you were
Yeah.
getting paid to escape. A lot of people find refuge in addictions that
Yeah.
aren't as productive for their well-being or their health or
Yeah.
both mentally and physically.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. So that does have something to do with the support of just like the endless amount of support that I felt. So I never really, you know, got into um any types of addictions that would, you know, have any immediate consequences, you know, like drinking or, you know, dancing or getting into relationships with men solely for money. You know, those types of addictions to kind of go from being one princess to being another type of princess. I didn't really get into that. I became my own princess to myself. I would, you know, work
Mm,
and, you know, find ways to be, you know, economically sound. Yeah.
yeah. And
Hmm.
so you said in high school, to bring it back a little bit, that you were doing like newspaper, radio, TV, local TV stuff, and then in college you said you were at bookstore, student gov. What were you studying in school? Was it more so on like the media press side of things, or
Yeah,
did
no,
you like dabble with finance or
yeah.
money?
So I also, I don't have a finance degree. So I also, when I went to college, I also worked on the school's news. That's one of my other jobs. Like I had so many jobs, bro. That was one of my other jobs. I also worked for the TV station. So I got paid from the TV station, the on-campus TV station. That was one of my jobs to cover events and get paid for that. Yeah, like literally.
Sheesh.
I also worked at a call center. Like I had so many jobs, like so many jobs, and I wasn't afraid. Like I was able to balance my classes and going to work. So plus, because I was an RA, I got a free lunch plan. I didn't have to pay for food. Like
Yeah.
I've been like
This
this for
is
a long
you were
time.
setting yourself up in good positions.
Yeah, I did. I've been like this for a long time. And then so I didn't have a finance degree. My degree is in communications and TV, but money, that whole idea, like when you don't begin to really be dealing with the root of, you know, why you make chances, like still to this day, sometimes I don't always feel like I don't feel like underwhelmed by my financial responsibilities. Like I still sometimes can really relate to that place of just having like the rug ripped from underneath me, and sometimes that causes me to shrink, right? So
Yeah.
I'm always like, okay, if I don't go too far, you know, I have this level of comfort that I can maintain. Well, whereas I have accomplished a lot of things that, you know, a lot of people be like, oh, that's great, that's really good, you know, that's great that you've done that, but I still have that internal feeling of like, okay, the rug could get ripped under me again. So because of that, when I graduated from school, most people, if you really want to become a journalist, you have to go and work in like a smaller city where you can basically make your mistakes. Like I'm from Miami. You don't want to be a young news reporter on the 7 o'clock news here in Miami, because if you make a mistake, everybody over the entire world is going to know. But like if you're like in this very small city, plant city, somewhere that nobody really knows about, you have the opportunity to build your reputation, make a few mistakes, grow,
Yeah.
but so the salary at that particular time starting out was like $16,000. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's no way, like I'm not gonna be able to survive on my own doing that. I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna be able to take care of myself. I'm not gonna do that. So I cheated myself out of the opportunity of going and becoming a news reporter just because I really didn't feel like I would be able to financially support myself. Whereas I had already did so many things to prove to myself that I can take care of myself, but because the wound of feeling like I can't do this, um caused me to shrink and not make the best decisions. I made good decisions but not the best decisions. So the first job that I was offered when I graduated from school was a job working for Home Depot, the marketing department. It was for $45,000. I got paid $600 every single week. I bought my first home by the time I was 22. I used my severance check to do it, took some money out of my 401k without any penalties. Like, this is the life that Shani could relate to, right? It was a very comfortable life. I understood it, it was clear, and I could travel on that money. I didn't have many expenses. It was just great for me. But now, as a full-on adult, I'm well aware on how that process of transitioning from, teenager until young adult and just not really feeling financially confident. I definitely made a lot of decisions that supported my comfort as opposed to my confidence.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's deep. Yeah, I feel like when it comes to, and not just even money, but I feel like that's what a lot of things in life. A lot of people tend to do that. Whether it's dreams, whether it's whether it's aspirations, business ideas, whatever, asking for a raise or promotion. Like, I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of people tend to make that habit of making decisions based off where they're at right now and not where they know they should or could be. And they
Mhm.
whether it's imposter syndrome or whatever it may be, it is a bunch of different things that could probably be the fact of it. But it's like, I think we're all guilty of like kind of selling ourselves short a little bit in one way or another,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I was gonna say too, it's like I remember me like when I first originally got into real estate, right? I was asked to teach social media classes, right? And that's what kind of led to AI eventually. But before, like, the person who asked me, my first response when they asked me originally was, instead of saying yeah, like, was I never taught a class before, right?
Mhm.
And they weren't coming to me on how to sell houses, right? They were coming to me for social media help because I'm about a third of the age of most realtors. And so it was just like a situation where, had they not said, John, like, let us know when you want it scheduled, I could have fumbled a massive opportunity right there, because at that point in time, I ain't sell a house. So I was like, I got no business teaching y'all about anything, even
Yeah.
though it wasn't my idea. It was their idea. They were coming to me asking me for something, and I was fumbling the bag because I wasn't confident enough in myself. Or I was more comfortable not teaching the class because it's not something I've done before. So I definitely resonate with that. And that's just one example. So then let me ask you, to keep the story going a little bit. So for me, my and there's a lot of men that listen to the podcast. So when you start talking about emotions a little bit, right? We got to simplify. We got to dumb it down a little bit. So for
Mhm.
me, my first time ever really getting into emotional intelligence and be like just understanding why I feel was in junior year of high school. About ish, my best friend told me about attachment styles, and that
Mhm.
was my first time ever looking into why I ticked or why I did certain things or why I operated the way I did and maneuvered the way I did when certain situations happened. And I started doing a lot of reflection. And as I started learning more and more about like the emotional attachment styles, and I'm a little rusty now, but I started became pretty good at pattern recognition. I mean, humans are naturally pretty good at pattern recognition, but I started to become really aware of like all the bad habits and tendencies that I had, that I built. Don't know when I built them or how they were built, but they were just almost like pre-built, I guess you could say, into me. And it took me a lot, and I know you say you do a lot with the emotional side of things. So it's like, when did you start getting into learning more about your emotional side, and when did you make the tie to your finances? Because I feel like most people never at least make that second step of like, okay, maybe my emotions are driving how I spend. Most people understand like
Mhm.
their emotions control you a little bit, but no one ever tends to tie it to money. So two-part question: what kind of got you more into like learning about that emotional side, and then how do you attach it to money?
Mm. Okay, so the way how I started focusing in on there had to be something to how people emotionally relate to money, because when I was a banker, so eventually I worked for Home Depot, and then I went to go and sell cars for a little bit. And after I sold cars for maybe about 2 years, I then became a banker. And as a banker, I had the opportunity to work in a very wealthy neighborhood as well as a very uh, a neighborhood where the income was minimum wage, right? So I worked in affluent, and then I worked in a a space where it's like minimum wage. And largely a community of people who English was not their first language. And I
Yeah.
would just look at uh, how much they work and how little they were compensated for what it is that they did versus those that were more professional, nurses, doctors, attorneys, all of these different spaces of financial, producers. And I would observe what those demographics would come to the bank for. So largely those that were um, had economics, at the minimum wage, I would look in their accounts and they would have 40, 50, $60,000 in liquidity in their bank accounts. And I would always wonder, like, how is it that you make $8, $10 an hour, and you're able to put, this amount of liquid aside, versus in the more affluent neighborhood, why is it that the majority of the people came in arguing about, can you take this overdraft fee off? They were getting denied for loans. They wanted to prematurely apply for personal loans in order to get themselves out of some type of financial challenge rut that they had gotten themselves into. So I started to look at, hey, why are people at this level saving so much more money, and these people are at such a deficit based on education and employment? And that's when I started emotionalizing money, those that didn't find money easy to come by, they just had a different relationship with money. They were more likely to hoard things and to hold on to them. They rarely overdraft their accounts simply because, like, they weren't living, some grand lifestyle, like there wasn't tons of dining out and, splitting the bill with a bunch of their friends. That just wasn't there. Versus those that, had a job that suggested that they, should have a level of a lifestyle, they were putting themselves in these financial binds. So that's when I began to kind of like emotionalize it. For my own self, I think I started to be able to do that for others before I began to do it for myself, before I started having that connection with myself. The connection that I was beginning to emotionally relate to money is once I had my first son, because I then moved from being a banker into being an entrepreneur, which means that I had the opportunity to really spend way more time with myself. Entrepreneurship is the deep dive into self development, because in entrepreneurship, you're going to fail a whole lot more versus like when you are working, when you're full-time employed, even if you are failing, you may not hit those commissions, but you're not going to not be able to eat, because you're going to get paid. You're going to get that check. Versus when you're an entrepreneur, you have to create value and present the value that you create, and people have to want to exchange with the value that you're putting in front of them. So there's a few different layers of that. And sometimes you can get yourself stuck in whichever of those particular cycles about your production and things like that. And because I was then again, as an entrepreneur, taking myself back to that spot where I felt the most financially vulnerable, when I had just gotten to college and kind of changing up the way that, I had access to money because my parents were no longer affording it. I began to relate entrepreneurship back like to when I felt unstable and just not in control of my resources again. And then I was able to connect those stories to see like, okay, why are you feeling, so financially vulnerable? What do we need to do to kind of answer this call again, to kind of get yourself up to speed with, the goals that you're setting versus the goals that you're actually accomplishing. So that's when the conversation began to start happening more on an internal level. One, because as an entrepreneur, you spend way more time by yourself and your failure is way more apparent. So you have to interface with it more often. You can't just bat it off because it's like right in your face.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like to
Yeah.
keep going like that bat analogy or like the bat it off, right? It made me think of like for entrepreneurship, you're gonna strike out a lot more in
Hmm.
life when you're an entrepreneur, but you're also gonna hit a lot more home runs if you stick with
Oh
it.
yeah. Oh yeah, for
And so it's
sure.
like, and them home runs eventually they become grand slams, and it don't take too many grand slams before like your name start popping off real. But it's like it's that rich reward, right? The valleys are deeper, right, and the
Hmm.
peaks are higher, right? And so it's like
Exactly.
taking that, and the thing with starting off too, it's like you mentioned, it's like a deep dive into self reflection and personal development. It's like when you're starting off, usually most people are in your circle, especially like statistically speaking, the majority of the world are employees, right? So it's like
Hmm.
it's hard unless you start going to masterminds very early on and stuff like that, which most entrepreneurs don't even find out about like masterminds and conferences until like they start growing a little bit more as an entrepreneur. So usually them earlier days are spent with just you in the mirror and that's it, and you questioning why nothing is working,
Yeah, why are you
right? And you
failing?
trying to figure out everything.
Hmm. Yeah. So that internal process gave me the opportunity to start plugging into this, looking at some of my own dysfunctional habits, and just going and allowing myself to grow. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 12 years, so I've seen a lot of phases. I've seen a lot of failures, I've seen a lot of successes, I've seen a lot of miracles, I've seen a lot of deficits. I've seen almost every type of you know, weather of a of a entrepreneur. Like I've seen almost every climate. I've seen every cash
Yeah.
climate, and I know that miracles do happen, I know that deficits happen because I live them. So, during those different phases of who I was financially, I had the opportunity to go through all of those phases. But what I noticed from each new financial level that I have the opportunity to go through, I wouldn't call it little girl Shani. I would call it teenage Shani is always there to meet me and to question me about stability. Little girl Shani really doesn't have a whole lot of questions about money because she grew up in a lap of luxury. She really didn't
Yeah.
have any frustrations, versus when I became, in a young adult in college, that's the woman that I often have to interface with about, what are you willing to do to get to your next level? Are you going to shrink or are you going to swim? So that's the girl that I have to go back to kind of challenge myself with and learn a lot from her as relates to shrinking, as we learn to expanding, taking risk, sometimes like, okay, do you want to not take a risk again? Because remember, you never did become that news reporter, you never did because you were so afraid and you're just so afraid of this, and that. Do you want to have that conversation about, your 30-year-old self, your 35-year-old self? Do you want to have that conversation? So oftentimes I have to push that person to, go forward in that way. So I learn a lot from that version of Shani, in terms of her capacity to level up, as well as her capacity to kind of just like, bearing grant and just, feel a little stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You remind me of the what you said reminded me of this lady I interviewed on a podcast a little while, a few months ago it was, named Shamitria. She's really a really nice lady, and she was talking about like how like in entrepreneurship and just in life in general, how pretty much how there's so many times where we get in these situations where times start getting tough, as you mentioned, like the financial distress that comes with entrepreneurship, and
Hmm.
that's when a lot of like the stuff that we didn't know that was deep inside starts to pop out.
Hmm.
And so I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit. It's like when you were going through those times, especially because emotions tend to like control us a lot of times, and a lot of times it's not until it hits the fan that things start coming to the surface that we didn't know we had deep down. So it's like times like that, how are you able to, keep your, your money habits and your financial habits in at least where they needed to be, or if they even got off course, how do you get them back on track to where they needed to be? So you didn't catch yourself, reverting back to old habits for a long period of time.
So, was I able to? So then there's your actual physical financial habits, and then your mental financial habits that you have to be aware of. So you could be doing something with your physical habits that are not really that detrimental to you, like
Yeah.
you can just be saving all of your money and just putting it to the side, but mentally you're also not doing anything to move yourself forward. Like you're not investing, you're not learning any new skills, you're just sort of just holding on to the money and sitting in the same spot, not taking any risks, not doing anything. So physically you look like someone who is doing the right thing by just putting the money to the side. Well, inflation is going to play a large role in that. What you can get for $40,000 today will not be what you can get for $40,000 in 3 years, right? It definitely wasn't what you can get with $40,000 5 years ago, right? It's just a different world. So you have to be aware of both of your dynamics. You have to be aware of your physical dynamics as well as your mental dynamics, and your mental dynamics matter way more. So, I the way how I pull myself out of like different levels is I have accountability. So I have to meet with my accountant, right? I have assistants on my team. I have to meet with them. And those conversations are not always, hey, this is really great. It's like, okay, this is how you've been underperforming, what type of habits, what type of plan, what type of behaviors do you now want to put in place so that you can ascertain the new level that you want. Do you want to stay where you are or do you want to move forward? So, one of the biggest things for me is allowing myself to have that financial vulnerability with people that, like they're my friend in a way, but not so much. They're more so there for the accountability. So, the friendship is not really the biggest aspect of it. The accountability in the mirror that they reflect back to me to show me, hey, Shani, this is where you are, and this is where you've been for a while. And then there's some other partnerships that I have that, I also have like publicists and things like that. So they send me checks, they pick up my brand sponsorships, and so I may be feeling a certain kind of way about one aspect of my business, but I can have a meeting with them and they'll be like, oh, well, you picked up an extra $30,000 this year doing this. And then they'll be like, oh, well, this part of my business may not be working, but this part of my business is working. So I would say having accountability and relationships that will allow you to be vulnerable has played a very large role in my ability to move through some of those different levels of my entrepreneurship.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. It's one of those things where, um, when it comes to, like, as you said, like the accountability piece. So that's part of the reason why I started joining a couple masterminds. And as
Mhm.
to talk about what we talked about earlier about like entrepreneurship and starting off and it being kind of a little lonely in the journey into personal development. It's hard to get advice from people who don't understand what you got going on and don't
Mhm.
understand the lifestyle of if you don't show up today, you're not going to eat. You're not going to have nothing to, come back to. So it's like most people, as you said, show up and they're good, whether they give it 150% or they give it
Oh yeah.
50% or less than
Mhm.
50%. And it's like the check is coming in, and it's not until and a lot of people give advice on theory, and a lot of ideas sound good, but it's like, man, if they're not in the thick of it with you or haven't at least been through the thick of of entrepreneurship, it's hard for people to really talk about how to get you from point A to point B if they never took the journey themselves or experienced it at
Well,
all.
you know what? I like both. I like having um, people that are in entrepreneurship share guidance and different
Yeah.
experiences with me. And I also like to work with because like my team is made up of a myriad of people. So I have an accountant, I have an assistant, I have maybe about four assistants that work with like different aspects, and they're all at different financial levels of themselves. So what they share with me is from different aspects. Some of them have not
Yeah.
been an entrepreneur for 12 years like myself, right? So they may be first or second or third year entrepreneurs, so they're hungry. They have a different hunger. They're not jaded. They haven't experienced so much failure that maybe I'm thinking about giving up. And then there's some that I communicate with that just have like an amazing work ethic. And then some just are able to really, like when I work with the individuals that work on my branding team, they have a way of like, you know, getting money with the ease, like they work with $100,000 contracts, $50,000 contracts. That's their world. That's where they communicate. So, I like interfacing with people from varied financial experiences as well as varied levels of entrepreneurship, because depending on the time and what the need is, that person is going to come in and fill. One of my assistants exclusively works with me only on like my TikToks, and she's young. I think she's 21 years old, so she's young. And sometimes she'll just like be like, well, you gotta just do it like this. And I'm just thinking to myself about the amount of experience and how things should be done, da 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 da. And she'll come in and shatter those thoughts because she's young, She has like a
Yeah.
different perspective, like she isn't as hard on her thoughts and things like that. So she can offer something, new to me that I may just be resistant of just because I've been doing something a certain kind of way for so long and just rigid on my ideas. So
Yeah.
I welcome the entrepreneurial advice from any level. I like to speak with people who have struggled and those who haven't, because those who have struggled remind me of young Shani, and then those who aren't struggling reminds me, puts me in perspective of one when I'm not struggling, like okay, I can see a little over the riverband, or they put me in touch with success that I have accomplished before, and it can be a reminder. So it really depends on the day and time. So the right people always show up, though. So
100%. And for the people that want you to show up more in their life, how can we connect with you, Shani? How can we find you? How can we keep up with all the amazing things you have going on all the social media platforms and all the channels and everywhere?
So I am person empowerment on all social spaces, so you can always find me there. I do offer what's called a financial wellness score, where you'll have the opportunity to kind of look at your score. It'll help you be able to see your reluctancies, your stagnations. If you're more interested in um, the money therapy aspect, whereas in we can find your um, young Shani within you, because I'm sure everyone has a young Johnny, a young Shani, a young Marcus, a young whatever your name is, fill in the blank. That person is there, and you have to make sure that you're not only learning from the parts of yourself that is successful, but you also can take lessons from the parts of yourself that failed. Both of them are your friends, and together you guys are able to journey through life in a way that you're really proud of. So you can find me on anything person empowerment. I have a 15-minute money therapy session where in there we can kind of like find your trigger space real quickly. And I work with groups as well as individuals. So I look forward to helping you transcend and transmute whatever stage and level that you might be in to get to your next level.
Amazing. And that's going to be in the show notes for anyone that is interested. Make sure to take her up on that. I got to eat lunch with Shani and a couple other people over at FinCon and had an amazing time chatting with her. So definitely go check out the show notes. And now it's time for our famous 5 questions. And
Okay.
question number 1: what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Um, I was going to share one, but that one wasn't money related. What is the most impactful lesson? Showing up. I think showing up is really, 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 really important. Um, like I've had the opportunity to when I've gone to certain workshops and I could be answering a question in the audience and it would land me on TV within the next 2 weeks, right? That's actually how I got like my most consistent news contribution segment on CBS just by showing up. I've also been in a space where at that time I think I might have had 400 followers on YouTube, and I landed my first sponsorship for $10,000. Sometimes I do videos. I can do 4 videos, and I'll get paid $15,000. So I just would say, no matter if you are an entrepreneur or if you are employed, that by showing up to your next phase, oftentimes you will receive different seeds that will plant you towards your next level. So that would be one of my biggest lessons. Like show up. The one that I was going to share that has nothing to do with money is like don't internet date. Like I think internet dating, I think internet dating. That's the one I didn't want to say because it didn't have anything to do with it. But I just find like, for instance, and it's actually like everything is economics for me. Everything is economics. Like it all comes down to the bottom line. So oftentimes, like a lot of times, a lot of people will like be flirting with me in my DMs, and they get wrapped into the fantasy or whatever the case may be. And I just think it's just such a really poor use of your time. I think that for the most part, if you don't have a lot of financial wherewithal, it's better for you to date local, because what it takes to really build a solid connection with the person requires that you are, interfacing with that person in the physical aspect. And if you're just not financially sound, you just don't have the financial resources to be flying back and forth, paying for dinners and arguing about 50-50 or whatever it is that you have going on. It's just not financially savvy. I think that people should really date local. And oftentimes
Yeah.
when people show up in my DMs, I always point them back like, it's more sensible and more affordable for you to date a woman in your city, in your town. That's just a better use of your time. So that was the first answer, but that was like, that doesn't have anything to do with it,
No,
but it actually
I
does.
think that's valid advice because I feel like a lot of people like Tinder and stuff like that are starting to become more and more just like hookup apps and stuff, and then people get, as you said, caught up in a fantasy of like, oh, it looks good, it feels good, but it's not real, or it's
It's
like, I mean,
not.
it could be real, but it's like it's not real, as I said, in the physical sense. It's through a phone or whatever. So I
Yeah, and
definitely agree with that.
yeah, and if you're going to be able to actually build a sustainable relationship, it requires some physical interaction. We're not just talking about sexual intimacy. We're talking about, going to the grocery store, sitting in a line together, getting annoyed, like you need that in real time. So yeah, that's what I was going to say.
No, 100%. All right. So next topic or next question is, what is the most admirable trait a person can have?
The most who?
Not for dating. Most admirable.
Oh, the most
Admirable.
admirable. I think self-reflection is the most admirable part of who a person is. So it doesn't matter so much what you have done; it matters, do you have the capacity to course correct? That's what matters more than anything. Because 9 out of 10, you're probably going to do something financially. You're probably going to do something humanly that it's just from an outdated version of yourself. Your money habits, your thinking habits, your conflict resolution habits, they're just outdated. So if you have the capacity to self-reflecting, you have the capacity to grow. And that's financially, in almost any category. Just if you can self-reflect.
If you had to change someone's life, but you only had one book, which book would you recommend?
Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
What is the legacy that you're working on leaving behind?
Two. So I own quite a bit of financial real estate. So I spend a lot of time with my children in helping them understand financial wealth, so that it's not something that they fumble. And then I also do a lot of self reflection on myself to make sure that I'm not just passing them money, but I'm also passing them emotional health in hopes of them when they themselves are in control of the financial resources that I've been able to accumulate up until this point, that hopefully they'll have the emotional intelligence to grow them as opposed to just squander.
And final question, for anyone that wants to embark on their Walk 12 today, what is the first step you recommend they take?
If they want to walk to start walking, right? To just start hitting that actual pavement. One of the things that I've done after you and I've met is that it's a goal for me to get 10,000 steps every day. And for the most part, I do. Sometimes I come like right at 8,000 on the weekends specifically, but walking and being outdoors is huge for your emotional well-being. And if something's good for your emotional well-being, it won't be long before it catches up to your physical well-being. The root word in wealthy is well. So if you begin to embrace wellness within your physicality, then you're going to catch up. So take a walk.
Amazing. Shani, it was amazing having you on the podcast. I'm so glad we were able to connect at FinCon, and I'm so excited to continue to collab and grow with each other. Thanks again for hopping on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy speaking with you.